These videos are educational in nature and are designed to help people over 21 who smoke cigarettes switch to a less harmful alternative. All right, well, what's up, everybody? It's Grimm Green back here, and today, listen, we're going to be watching probably the best interview I have ever done on this YouTube channel. This isn't just some talking head. My guest has been in the trenches for decades, fighting big tobacco, helping shape public health policy, and actually making a difference in the world of tobacco harm reduction. He has fought big tobacco up and down in the courts. He was the vice president of tobacco control at the American Cancer Society. He was an advisor to the Surgeon General. He's the current head of Global Action to End Smoking, and he's the current director of the University of Michigan's Tobacco Research Institute. So grab your vape, tuck in. This is an amazing interview. We talked about science, we talked about policy, we talked about Mike Bloomberg, we talked about youth vaping, we talked about EVALI. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cliff Douglas. Well, I can't believe it. We're here with Cliff Douglas, and I know who Cliff Douglas is, but for any of my viewers who may not know who Cliff Douglas is, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, list off your credentials, just tell us why should any of my viewers listen to anything you have to say?
I appreciate that. Well, let me tell you just a little bit in a nutshell. I started working on fighting the smoking epidemic, what we've generally called the tobacco epidemic, over time in the late 1980s. And I was involved in leading the national campaign to remove smoking from airplanes, for example. That's one of the sort of historic cases that folks are familiar with, and it changed a lot of things. I was representing the American Heart Association, American Cancer Society, and the American Lung Association back then. This world that we're in now was very small. That was the only national organization working on these issues, and its annual budget was $165,000. Including my salary, that of the staff director, and some other folks. And so it gives you an idea of how small it was in the larger scheme of things, considering that we're talking about the leading preventable cause of death, right? Cigarette smoking. So over the many years, I worked with the major health groups. In the late 2010s, I led tobacco control for the American Cancer Society. I worked in government a couple of times, as a special counsel on tobacco issues for a member of Congress, and coordinated what was called the Congressional Task Force on Tobacco and Health, which was members of Congress who actually were interested in these issues and wanted to save lives. It was good stuff. And along the way, also worked for the Surgeon General as an advisor and the Assistant Secretary for Health as an advisor. This is all on tobacco policy matters, and those were during the Barack Obama administration from 2010 to 2015. And I mentioned the Assistant Secretary for Health. A lot of folks don't really know what that is, but that's the member of the federal government who oversees the whole public health service, basically the lead public health official for the United States. And that was Howard Koh, who is a longtime advocate for ameliorating the terrible things that come from cigarette smoking. And we were involved in issuing the first strategic action plan for the Department of Health and Human Services to combat the tobacco epidemic. And, interestingly, almost all of the things that I'm talking about and more occurred before the opportunity arose for real, robust harm reduction from the epidemic. And so it kind of hit a lot of folks here. And you, of course, were familiar with this and taking advantage of it even before many people in public health really got it or got involved in it. But I too slowly came along and evolved and came to be aware of, holy cow, look at how much progress we can make here, and to fight back against some of the stagnation in trying to reduce smoking and save lives. And I just really came to be fully on board that. And by the way, part of the background there, and this is just to finish up what I claimed was going to be a nutshell description of my background, was the fact I was working for the American Cancer Society, and e-cigarettes started to really become prominent in the discussion. A lot more people were vaping, and this is around 2015, 2016, and we really wanted to figure out, how do we manage this? What do we need to know about it? And we brought together and this is little known, we brought together a number of external experts, probably 20, 25 people from various fields to come together and help advise ACS on what to do. And the bottom line that we arrived at was, you know what, this isn't about vaping, folks. This isn't really about alternative products. What it's about is reducing smoking. Mm-hmm. And it resulted in our issuing this paper that I lead authored with some other leaders from the Cancer Society, called the American Cancer Society Public Health Statement on Eliminating Combustible Tobacco Use in the United States. So we came up with a very short title. Yeah. And there was, what's it about? Something like 99% of all so-called tobacco-related deaths are caused by smoking. Yeah. And so that's the target. That's the 800-pound gorilla. And then we looked at, so how do you get there? How do you get there? And that was something that led to us looking at, well, we've got traditional means. There are nicotine medicines, gum and patch, and some other pharmaceutical products. And then there's this whole new area of consumer products that should be considered as a viable alternative here for those folks who choose to go that route, who may need or really benefit from that route. So we took a broader view of this. And, as conservative as it was, when you look back, it was seen as pioneering by some folks who got it, because we were at least acknowledging, recognizing that there are broader ways to get at this that speak to people's lived experience, to what people really, managing their own lives, and give that respect and compassion so folks can do the best things for themselves based on their terms and go forward. So it led to the rest of this. I can tell you in the process, because I left out one little tidbit, that as a lawyer, I worked on a number of lawsuits against the cigarette companies over the years, and also worked with whistleblowers from inside the cigarette companies who came out, to try to tell the truth about things. And it did really give me a huge sensitivity to the fact that, big tobacco, as they're referred to, the big cigarette companies, have borne a lot of responsibility for having engaged in conspiracy and fraud, lied to all of us over many, many decades. And so I was seen as this type of sort of aggressive, tobacco control advocate. But all of that just sort of helps inform my understanding of the world. And the bottom line ultimately is, what's the truth?
Yes.
What's the truth? How do we get at, just helping people based on what we know and move forward on that basis? That's what public health, really ought to be.
Yeah. Look, I wish I could agree with you more. Sometimes I feel like when I first discovered vaping and e-cigarettes, it almost felt like these were invented for me. I loved smoking cigarettes. I like nicotine. I still enjoy nicotine. And I wasn't one of these self-hating smokers. I really enjoyed it. And so when I learned that there was a product that wasn't combustion, that wasn't cigarettes, but was still sort of mimicking that and let me inhale and exhale and let me get my nicotine, I thought this is going to change the world. This technology is going to actually change the world, because it lets the person go at their own pace and lets the person decide what sort of device you want to use, what sort of liquid you want to use, what nicotine level. Maybe this is too high, maybe this is too low. When you find that sweet spot and everything just clicks, and you can easily say goodbye to combustion and say goodbye to cigarettes with this technology. Unbelievable.
It's a great, well, I was going to say story, but that's such a weak word. It's such a great personal testimonial from you, Nick, and from many others who have had this type of success. And it's been with, the whole sort of heterogeneous world of vaping products. Now it's also taking place with other products like nicotine pouches. It's taking place with the, sort of the Swedish style of much less harmful, far safer snus, tobacco, and other products. And that's what, we look at. So we don't look at it from the perspective of, say, promoting a particular product, but
Yeah.
rather making people aware based on the best scientific understanding of the whole menu of options or opportunities
Mm-hmm.
that folks can have to, number one, bottom line, to move away from cigarette smoking.
Yeah.
And
Period.
there's agency, uh, but of course you need to know what the truth is. And
Yeah.
I know this gets into a whole other area that you've spent hours and hours focusing on and discussing and analyzing and helping people understand. But, this
Mm-hmm.
whole area of the polarization that's taken place and the
Yeah.
need for people to just hear the unvarnished, clear truth,
Yes.
scientifically accurate truth, away from the politics, away from everything else, and so that
Yes.
we can all take as much control as we can over our lives and do the best things for us and our families and our friends and
Yes.
coworkers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if I'm thinking about like big picture stuff, why is it, do you think, that harm reduction remains so controversial despite the very clear evidence, like you were talking about in Sweden? They literally just became a smoke-free country. There is this evidence that it saves lives. Why does it remain so controversial?
Well, I wish I was the white bearded sage on the top of the mountain and I had all of those answers. They're obviously kind of complex and they're nuanced. And one
Yeah.
thing I will say, by the way, because of the Swedish experience, as we call it, it's really a critical, extraordinary model for Europe, for the world. And yet, as and some folks know, the rest of Europe banned smokeless tobacco, including snus. And what an unbelievable paradox it is, because Sweden and then other parts of Scandinavia, you can look to Norway and elsewhere, moved ahead over a number of years, dramatically reduced smoking prevalence, smoking consumption among their people, their citizenry, and significantly reduce the harm that's caused by smoking. And snus isn't, quote unquote safe. We deal with this question all the time, but harm reduction isn't about, perfection and all risk in the world goes away, but it's about, how much can you reduce illness? How much
Yes.
can you increase, longevity,
Yes.
just surviving? And they've done it. They have done it in a remarkable way. And yet you look just south of Sweden at dozens of other countries, and it's not permitted. So, why is that? Well, I guess I touched on it earlier. One part of the answer is the huge distrust in this amorphous, overgeneralized concept of the industry,
Sure.
the tobacco industry. And we often see this conflation of, one industry that caused huge amounts of damage in the 20th century and has continued into the 21st. And those are the very major transnational commercialized cigarette companies. We all know that. There are many books written about it. And the focus for many decades, and I spent time in my career on that focus as well, has been on defeating the industry, beating back big tobacco. They foisted nicotine addiction on billions of people, and there is some accuracy to that. And it's not only in the U.S., it's all around the globe, and particularly among folks who have fewer resources, or more marginalized or disadvantaged in society, less education, less money, maybe in some marginalized groups with greater social pressures. It can be LGBTQ+, it could be certain ethnic or racial minorities, so on and so forth. And big tobacco has been this symbol of evil for so long that when any products come along that involve nicotine and usage by, say, millions of people, the default among major parts of my public health or tobacco control community is to say it's bad. It's just all evil. It's all about these bad actors making billions of dollars. Just no, just no. And it turns into then a war on all things nicotine and conflates all products, regardless of they're vastly different characteristics if you look at, the so-called continuum of risk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just all bad. We're going to fight it all. And we're concerned about kids. And by the way, we're all concerned about kids unless you're a sociopath.
Exactly.
I'm a dad. My son's 22. By the way, he vapes. And if it's in place of smoking, then that's a benefit to him. But again, it's complicated. I have the very same concerns, but it gets back to what I tend to refer to as the need for us to walk and chew gum at the same time, that we can do everything we can to protect more vulnerable youth, adolescents, children, but also serve the urgent needs of tens of millions of adults in the US and then more than 1 billion worldwide in ways that we're not effectively doing right now, with respect and compassion and honesty and accuracy.
Yeah.
So that, this is some of the background. Again, I don't have all of the answers, but that's what I perceive.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's easy. We've been, as a society, kind of, I guess, demonizing, like you said, big tobacco for so long that it's easy for them to just become a punching bag where anything that big tobacco does is evil. Doesn't matter. If it's cigarettes, that's evil. If it's nicotine, that's evil too, because it's coming from big tobacco. And there seems to be this sort of what I've been calling like a neo-Puritan sort of movement happening where people like you and I are very concerned with the current death and disease happening from combustible products. And we'd like to see people using combustible products switching to something less harmful. But then others have moved past that and said, well, now it's all addiction. Now it's all nicotine. Quitting smoking isn't good enough anymore. You have to quit everything. The best thing you can do is to quit everything. And that's, sure, that could be a noble goal in the future. But right now, I'd like people to stop dying from smoking cigarettes. And that's a really easy thing to do. And unfortunately, I think we see a lot of this neo-Puritanism, coming from philanthropy, and, the role of billionaires like Mike Bloomberg, influencing global tobacco policy kind of based on this big tobacco bad, addiction bad. That's kind of their stance. And I don't know how to quantify those two things. I'd like people to stop smoking. Other people want people to stop using nicotine completely. And there has to be somewhere in the middle that we can meet and stop the death and allow people to use nicotine in the safest way that they can.
Yeah.
That's
right. Well, there's so many pieces to what you've just described, Nick, that make a lot of sense and truth in some of, in those observations that you've been making. And, one of those very basic lessons you learn in life is money talks.
Yes.
And when a great deal of that money is applied in certain ways, it talks and folks listen and it influences what happens. Doesn't always work that way, but it often does. And I think in this case, it does now. There are deeper questions as to where, if you were to talk about Bloomberg Philanthropies and Mike Bloomberg himself, where the perspective came from. I think we have some understanding of that. Why? In the interest of saving lives, of promoting public health, which I think is a genuine goal there, have sort of that contingent of our society, of our world working on this, gone in that direction. I mean, I can make guesses or educated guesses, but I think that one of the very fundamental questions here, it's one that I addressed side by side with Mitch Seller, whom folks are familiar with, having once led tobacco regulation for the Food and Drug Administration. Mm-hmm. We were at the e-cigarette summit in the spring of 2023, I believe it was, and we organized the closing session of that summit to focus on the so-called end state of tobacco control. In other words, what is the very end goal here? Not so much the how we get there, but what is it that folks want? And it kind of came down to this division between whether folks wanted to end all use of everything, as you've just described, all nicotine-based products, and defeating, sort of ending the role of the tobacco industry? Or was the end state, and who would disagree with this, but is it to save lives? Is it to end use of everything that causes the use of these products to be the leading preventable cause of death now, as it has been for many decades? And I mean, where I come down, I know where you come down, and many of us do. One would think that if you're looking at the end state, you're going to be looking at how are we going to help the most human beings live longer and healthier lives. Mm-hmm. And but there is a large contingent still. I think that the percentages or the proportion is gradually shifting, but who really are focused on, we've got to end all addiction. We've got to end all use of this drug, nicotine, by our youth, and that's it. And there are groups who just have thrown down the gauntlet, and that's what it's all about. And there may be philosophical differences, or maybe, as you said, there's a new Puritanism, or whatever it may be, that's way above my pay grade to figure out those large philosophical questions. But I do think that that's part of what's going on here. And I think that chipping away at it by being reasonable and even diplomatic, while firm and even aggressive in certain respects, to continue to convey the truth and show folks, not just tell them, but show them that they have our respect, that we're all in this together, and we're not hitting folks over the head to just be perfect human beings, and not use anything that, like, I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing, but like my coffee may actually create a dependency.
Sure.
I mean, ultimately, at a certain level, who cares if you're going to be better off and safer and healthier and live longer?
Yeah. Look, I very agree. And it seems like a lot of, groups are more upset at big tobacco than they are about the death and disease that cigarettes cause. And that kind of always blows me away, seeing people get so mad at big tobacco and continuing to, like you said, the goal is to tear down the industry. The goal is to rid the world of big tobacco. Is it, though?
Yeah.
Or is the goal, to be more upset at what cigarettes do than the people selling them?
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure. Well, and there are, of course, some complexities to this. You have to take into account, if you've got a severe problem and it's harming, if you will, a severe number of people, then you have to go back to the root cause. And one of the root causes has to do with the manufacturers of this thing, of this product that causes so much harm, and the fact that they've held so much sway over governments all around the world, and integrated themselves into at least some poor countries' economies, where you can look at a country or two where tobacco and tobacco growing may be the primary source of their economy, and this is all by design and intentional, and you can get really mad at if you will, that thing called big tobacco. But we also have to take into account the fact that a lot of this is very complicated, it's heterogeneous, and when we talk about the bad industry in the United States, there is no single industry. There are many producers of different things. My understanding from early on is that if you look at what we say called the vaping community really disliked so-called big tobacco. They no in the cigarette companies or what they were doing, but it's become a kind of convenient foil or cudgel for some of my public health community or tobacco control community to just conflate. It's great for communication and argumentation or advocacy. Just everything is big tobacco. Everything is targeted to harming our kids and addicting them to these products for profit. It's a very simple, but really misleading argument. And it's difficult to respond to such a simple, powerful argument in the way that we do, which is with nuance and more explanation and discussion. So I've likened it to, a sword fighting a notebook. And so it ain't easy, but we are carrying the notebook, if you will, but we also have some other sort of tool in our armamentarium, and we have got to continue to fight this good fight, because ultimately, if I may, I was thinking of saving it for later, but here's my mug, and it says, "Proceed as if success is inevitable."
I love that.
My dad, who's scheduled to turn 100 this July.
Wow.
Who in my family and background was the original tobacco control advocate, gave this to me around Christmas time in recognition of the work that I'm doing and we're all doing, because he sees the enormous value there. He's a public health expert.
Wow.
And he, like I, has a lot of confidence that we're going to win.
Yes.
In the long term, but of course, accelerating that is just so critical, because in the meantime, there can be a lot of damage, a lot of collateral damage if we speed up our work and our success.
Well, if we're fighting a sword with a notebook, we need a thicker notebook. We need to compile all that science into a big, thick notebook that can take down the sword. We were talking about youth vaping. We want to protect. Of course, we want to protect kids. I want to protect kids. You want to protect kids. I don't want kids vaping. I don't want kids smoking. It seems like, despite even CDC saying that youth vaping and youth smoking are at 25-year lows in 2025, it still gets easily amplified as like a panic thing that we need to panic about. Do you think that there's ever going to be a level of use by youth that won't put everybody into a moral panic?
Yeah. My hope, and actually my expectation, is that this is going to shift. In fact, in ways that aren't yet enough, and they're not satisfactory to many of us, I think, who understand this. There has been some shift already. I think when you look back to 2018 or so, and there was a visible, what turned out, not shockingly, to be a temporary spike in youth use of vaping products. It became the so-called Juul phenomenon. And then of course there was the EVALI phenomenon that hit just after that. It was quite a 1-2 punch, where now you've got 60 odd deaths and more than 2,000 hospitalizations from so-called vaping. Of course, It turned out to be adulterated, basically street products with THC and vitamin E acetate that uses a thickener, which caused severe lung illness in some people very rapidly, but had nothing to do with the, call them conventional nicotine-containing vaping products. That really turned things in a horrible direction, created a great deal of misunderstanding, and it was then amplified and exploited wrongly, I think, by parts of my public health community. But, while it was characterized as the youth vaping epidemic, except in some instances now, which are really rather absurd, you don't see much reference to the youth vaping epidemic anymore. That's already shifted in line with the dramatic reduction in vaping by youth, in the last 5 years, right? More than a 70% drop. It's at the lowest level in more than a decade now. Well, that's terrific progress. And, anyone who downplays that or misleads about it from public health would just, obviously be doing something wrong and not helpful. And I think making progress there. And then, the fact that youth smoking has dropped to the lowest levels in history, recorded history. That's an incredible success. And, I know you've seen and others have seen My good colleague Ken Warner and others who have
Yes.
documented that, made a very strong case for the, celebration level progress we've made there. That does add up. It
Yeah.
is gradually breaking through, and it's going to continue to break through, and that in turn is going to help the enterprise of helping more people stop smoking and also turn to harm reduction options wherever it's going to be helpful to them.
Yes. Yes. I mean, yeah, I'm continuously blown away that we're not having a parade every day for how low youth smoking numbers have become. I mean, I don't want to speak out of, tell tales out of school, but it seems like it's been virtually eliminated. And you can almost see it in the rise of vaping and in the drop in smoking. It's like on a perfect axis. And then it seems that youths got bored with vaping as well. And now they're kind of not doing either. And this is almost a best case scenario.
Yes. And it says so many things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There have been concerns about the so-called gateway effect, where youth use one thing, and in this case, it would have been vaping products. Well, they're going to move on to smoking. They're going to move on to other things, harder drugs. And, while the world is complex, I mean, clearly overall, that just hasn't taken place, because if there were a gateway, it sure isn't shown in any of the data, the information we have about, with vaping plummeting, smoking almost disappearing, smoking cigarettes particularly.
Yeah.
Maybe not weed, but but that's another kind of adjunct area.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, when I started in the late 80s, and I'd been in this for about a decade at the time when, in 1997, I think it was, the high school senior smoking rate was 37%, 36%, right around there. So more than a third. Mm-hmm. And now it's below 2%. Just to put a couple of numbers on the critical point you were just making. We have, it's dangerous to say this, but we have all but won that battle. And in a really relatively short period of time, because this epidemic and the issues around it, the challenges around it, have been here for 100 years, and or so. So tremendous progress, but so folks turn to whatever the next new bad thing is to just obsessively focus on. Yeah. And it doesn't mean it doesn't deserve attention. Of course we give it attention. We don't want youth exposed to things that may change their brains and affect their lives going forward. But, seriously, it is possible to walk and chew gum at the same time and take care of the millions and millions of people in need of the truth, in need of support, based on their preferences and our freedom to choose.
Yeah, I love that. I love everything about that. One of my favorite quotes of yours is, I'm going to butcher it. I can't even recite it off the top of my head. Something about smokers need to know, that they, something to the effect of that they can save their own lives. Smokers need to know that cigarettes aren't the only option. And my worry is, because of all of the negativity going on, and because we hear things like, well, it's a gateway to cigarette smoking for youths, and we hear about, popcorn lung and EVALI and things like that, that people who smoke cigarettes are going to become less and less willing to try it because they've heard so many negative things. And it's a struggle. Even on my YouTube, I have people in the comments saying, I smoke cigarettes, but I've heard all this, XYZ about vaping. Is it still a good choice? And I have to constantly reaffirm and go, yes, you're making the right choice. This is the best choice you can possibly make. Yes. The progress feels slower now, I guess, than it did even just a few years ago. And so changing that narrative for people who smoke cigarettes, getting them, like you said, factual information. Smoking is very dangerous. There's some products that are less dangerous. It doesn't mean that they're safe, but it can greatly reduce the harm in your life is such a nuanced answer when people just want to know if vaping's good or bad.
Yes, yeah, that's right. It does speak to the need, and there's a gigantic gap there overall for systematic, consistent, accurate, and accessible delivery of not science speak, but just accessible, understandable delivery of information to people, and the government health authorities who play the chief role in this area have not been entirely consistent, or when they're delivering accurate information, it's couched in a way that still raises undue concern. I mean, some concern is legit, but just too much is disproportionate, and that's not simple, and that's not the way that health communications works best. So you're right on about that, and I have to say. We're in a world right now where, in terms of what government health authorities may or may not be doing, it's really all thrown up in the air right now because there's so much chaos out there. And some of the chief communicators, those who have communicated very well, others who maybe had the opportunity or the potential to going forward, may no longer be there because the Food and Drug Administration in some ways has kind of been dismantled. We'll see what's going to happen. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, same thing.
Kind of the same, yeah.
So one thing that does, obviously, to the extent any of us have the ability and the resources to do it, and sometimes it means linking arms so that we have more resources together and so on, is there may be more responsibility, say, on an organization like mine, Global Action to End Smoking, and we feel it and take it seriously to communicate with folks, to provide unvarnished, clear, understandable information, and just do everything we can to make it available, disseminate it, be there as a resource, to respond to questions to the extent we can be helpful. And we're certainly not the only ones, but this is a heavy sense of responsibility that, as the leader of this organization now, I feel, and it's more important than ever given the chaos of our outer environment.
Well, and Global Action to End Smoking, I breathe a little sigh of relief when I think, okay, we have Cliff Douglas and the Global Action to End Smoking. Okay, so things aren't as bad as I think. There are good organizations and there are good people in good organizations who literally just want people to have the facts, to people to have the unpoliticized, bipartisan sort of data and empower people to kind of make these decisions for themselves. What do you see? What do we see moving forward? What's the future of Global Action to End Smoking? If we could start from scratch and sort of redesign tobacco regulation from the ground up, what would we change first? What would be our dream scenario as far as tobacco control goes?
Well, much to your credit, Nick, you don't ask easy questions. There's a lot to work. There's a lot to work on here. Well, a couple of things that come to mind. We've really built up our team, and I came to the organization and discovered that there were many really terrific, committed professionals there who are still here at the organization, and we sort of reformulated and relaunched the organization last May as Global Action to End Smoking. This organization has had and even still has some of its own headwinds and challenges over time, but we continue to make a lot of progress just based on, again, just the science and the truth and being objective stakeholders here. I do think that one of the things we've done, Catherine Foley, who joined the organization early last year, who came from a very successful career as a journalist for Politico, covering these issues and FDA regulation and more, has worked, with me and the rest of us on developing increasingly effective outreach to the public. A whole side of our work now, in addition to our grant making and other work, involves our education and communications to folks, just to, as we've been talking about, to provide accurate information here, to provide firsthand sort of testimonials from individuals in the community who have raised their voices, shared their stories about how they quit smoking, or how it's been a challenge to quit smoking, and the different ways that they've done it, including with alternative products. And as a result of this, we issue a monthly newsletter, and now have some thousands of users of that who apparently access it quite a bit and value that information. This is a new tool, and I encourage people to come. It's easy to find our website, and just put your name in, and you'll have access to this free information, globalaction-to-end-smoking.org. And then in other ways, by, like speaking with you today. I'm just so happy to finally, after all of this time, be able to sit together and chat about these issues, involving our shared commitment, being on the right side of communicating the truth to people and being accurate about it and supporting folks. And by the way, I really enjoyed seeing you at the U.S. Supreme Court in December. And that, of course, was where the oral arguments were held on the Triton case against the FDA. There was a decision just in the last couple of days. The Supreme Court ruled, in favor of the FDA. It's not surprising given the nature of the argument, but I would say to folks that while that's going to be a disappointment to many, it was a complicated case that got into questions of whether the court could issue a decision that would have had a practical impact and more difficult legal issues. I don't think it was a surprise, but what I think was useful, and we're very proud of this, if I can say that, is that our voices were heard. And when one looks at the Supreme Court's opinion, they reflect on relative risk and some of the science and medical public health understanding around the differences of these products. And there were 14 amicus briefs filed in the case. In other words, these are briefs filed with the Supreme Court that do not come from either of the parties in the litigation, but rather others who are interested and have expertise. There was one, I think, submitted by about 16 state attorneys general, one filed by a number of members of Congress from the House and the Senate, and then the big public health groups. And here's the thing that I have to share and celebrate for a moment. The only amicus brief that was filed and quoted and referenced by the U.S. Supreme Court was ours.
Oh, nice.
Ours. We were the only organization, interested party, third party, to file a brief as a neutral. That's a category that you can submit a brief to the Supreme Court in, and we did not advocate, obviously, for the FDA or even for Triton. We let folks battle out some of that, but what we did is we provided a very clear and straightforward understanding of just what we've been talking about, which is the fact that there is a clearly documented continuum of risk. Cigarettes are going to kill 1 out of 2 long-term users. And then at the far other end, you've got a range of nicotine products, either medicinal or non-medicinal, like e-cigarettes, pouches, snus, and the like. And they're far, far different. And I don't have to go into the details there because we all understand that well. So that the court would be aware of what was at stake here and what they were, rendering a decision on. And we also addressed the fact that a proper interpretation of the Tobacco Control Act that guides FDA regulation of tobacco and tobacco products has to be interpreted and applied correctly, and that the FDA has not done that. So I think that was clearly understood. We were glad to get that word in edgewise and for it to be recognized, even though the ultimate decision rested on a variety of things that just didn't play out in favor of what some of us would have liked to have seen happen. But
Yeah.
I think it's going to ultimately be a useful tool. Let me just add that as a positive note, that this decision will arise again and be used in ways that are going to help us make progress. And that's something to take a further look at.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and that is, it should be celebrated, and it feels to me, just in my experience, in my very short time doing this, I've only been involved in this space for, I guess, the last 15 years, which now that I say it out loud, that sounds like a kind of a long time. But just in my limited time, it seems as though the shift and the narrative is going to be very, very gradual. There's not going to be this big court case that's going to decide everything and then everything successful after that. It's going to be a very long, grinding, slowly getting people on board, slowly changing people's minds process. And I know that, and I foresee that. And one of the things that sort of encourages me is a number of years ago, I got to talk to Alex Wodak out of Australia, big harm reduction guy. And he turned to me and said, I don't think vaping has much to worry about. And I said, really? And he said, well, yes, you do, but harm reduction measures like this always win. It's just a matter of time. So that statement of saying that harm reduction measures like this always win, it's just a matter of time, has been one of the things that has continuously motivated me. Like, it's just a matter of time. We just have to keep going. We just have to keep changing minds, even if it's one at a time. But we just have to keep going because harm reduction measures like this always win.
Yes. I know Alex, and I would agree with him. I would hold this up again.
Yeah. Proceed as
if success is inevitable, and I think it is inevitable. Yeah. And I think the bigger question here, amidst all of the hurdles that we run into, those headwinds I referred to, the frustrations involved, is remaining optimistic. And, Skip Murray, many people know, we're going to be appearing on a panel together at a conference next month, who is a consumer advocate and
Great.
with her own lived experience.
Yeah.
And, with all of the challenges, I think of her because she's a motivator, and she continues to speak to and move ahead and keep at it because she knows what we're just talking about, that we are going to succeed over time. And when I think about some of the efforts to clamp down on these opportunities that we have to wrestle with, ultimately it's like a balloon being squeezed. People, the public, often, maybe too often called consumers because we are just people, are the balloon ends up expanding in another area. People will act on what they want, on what they need, and sometimes based on a truth that is not fully breaking through overall yet. But when you look at the U.S. and think that in a market that is largely illicit, if you will, largely unregulated
market, yes,
and that's a challenge, and that can be a problem because you want quality control, you want full information given, standardization to the extent that will help people get something that's going to work well and be safe, for them. Nonetheless, we've got something on the order of 20 million people in the U.S. who are vaping now, understanding, and and we're talking about maybe 28 million people who smoke. Well, that's an extraordinary sign of progress,
yes.
right there. And I believe, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but there have been some calculations done now of the number of smoking-caused deaths that have been averted already, predictably, by that shift in usage. And this isn't even in a marketplace that is really functioning correctly yet, or even to people's greatest benefit. And yet, that's why we see right there in front of us the change that's occurring and the progress that we are going to make. If I can put it this way, in this world, we are going to win.
Yes. I mean, I very agree that. And in a sense, we kind of already are winning because, like you said, the market in the U.S. is largely illicit. It's a very gray market. And even in that sort of hampered environment, it's still switching people away from cigarettes on a pretty big scale. And if it were celebrated or proliferated out farther than that, it could eradicate smoking in a few years, 1 or 2 years, if it was championed by the people who should be championing it.
Yes.
Instead of being hampered by the people who should be championing it.
That's well said. And, there are a number of us who are working through this, on the ground at a very sort of pragmatic level, who see that the greatest scenario, the best possibility here is that smoking is in the U.S. largely eradicated even by the end of, say, the Trump administration. I mean, which would be, in the scheme of things soon, right, as you're just suggesting. And that would depend on a number of things, including changes occurring at the FDA and there being a robust enough agency, and we'll see how things play out, where if they do the right thing, they could really accelerate progress here. And from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, there is that potential. And we don't know what they're going to do yet, but there are signs that the leadership with Dr. Marty Makary, who has not really delved into these issues previously, but in his book that he just published in recent months called Blind Spots, indicates that he takes an approach where he doesn't buy into the conventional wisdom, but rather he just looks at the data, looks at the evidence, and may take it in a different direction. Well, considering how things have gone, that could really play out well. I don't know, but I maintain some optimism here that we can make a lot of progress soon if certain things take place.
Yeah, well, rebellions are built on hope, as my favorite Star Wars movie says. And so, yes, we have to keep going. We have to keep moving. And all I've been saying on my live streams and on my YouTube is I want Makary and I want Kennedy. All they have to do is be a man of science. Period. That's all. Be a man of science. Let's see where the data goes. Let's see where the science leads. Odds are it's going to show that harm reduction works and that we could eradicate smoking in all cigarette smoking in the country. That's my hope. That's my optimistic hope.
Yeah. Well, you are right on there, and I appreciate that deeply. And we in this area of the field, it's so important to build coalition. You've been a leader in bringing people together through your channel and in other ways. And I think knowing that you're not alone, that there are so many of us at so many different levels and in different walks of life and everything else coming together around this. And then many people and many of you, I imagine, who are watching, who, in your own life, in your own personal life and through your own lived experience have undergone this kind of journey. And I hope have in your, individual case made progress. That's why we're going to win, because so many people really are involved in this, and going forward, making voices heard, and working on, if you will, just changing the system for the better. It's possible. I think that's what's going to be taking place. Yeah.
Well, I agree, and I'm glad we share the same optimism. We're creeping up on an hour here, believe it or not. So I don't want to take up your whole day, but seriously, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time, not just for this, but for Global Action to End Smoking, for all of your years of tobacco control, and for having that optimism, that we need. It gets to feel a little defeatist, especially being in it for 15 years and just having tax after flavor ban after tax after flavor ban, and then these products get limited and these products get demonized, and FDA says they have heavy metals and people don't want to switch to smoking, and now there's a youth vaping epidemic, and now there's a volley. It feels like we've just been getting pummeled into the ground, and so it's hard to kind of, justify having such optimism, but I can't not be optimistic about it because I know that these work and I've watched them change people's lives in a matter of a month, and Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for the optimism. We need it. Is there anything at the very end that you wanted to get off your chest, full-chestedly? Anything you want to say or encourage us to do? We need to hear it.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't have special words of wisdom that many that which you've just already voiced, and many here won't already have. You all do, but keep the faith.
Yeah.
We are making progress, and when you're getting knocked down a lot, and there are those examples you just cited, Nick, of the things that go wrong. Mm-hmm. When we talk about ups and downs, all of those downs, they're there. But ultimately, by keeping this up, we are going to succeed. We are succeeding. We are succeeding.
Yes.
Okay. And really, the question is here is accelerating it. Mm-hmm. Succeeding more quickly. Mm-hmm. And, the truth is out there, and the truth will out. And I think that in unpredictable ways, we can already see how much unpredictability there is in so many ways in our world. I think that we're going to see change take place, and we will be a part in all of our different ways, small and large, in making that change happen by sticking together, knowing that we're not alone, and there are a whole lot of people who understand the truth here and who are going to keep working to share it and really to save more lives out there, but also our own and in our families and with the people we work with and in our communities. It's happening, and I'm just delighted to be a part of it. I followed your lead a few years ago. I thank you for that, and Global Action to End Smoking is here again to be a resource to provide support. Please do go to the website, get on the newsletter. It's terrific, and there's so much to come. So thank you.
Yeah, actually, absolutely. Thank you. Let's end smoking. Let's do that.
Absolutely.
It's like 10:30, and I'm just gonna smoke. So.